Hi everybody, this is Rick Kafori with the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society. We're going to continue our digital presentation series with you here today. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. If you're returning here from a previous presentation, welcome back. We're going to be doing these digital presentations while we're unable to meet in person, so we hope you enjoy. We're offering a little Boston and Maine history here for you today. And we're going to continue on with Dana Goodwin's collection. As we mentioned last time, Dana Goodwin was one of the most prominent rail fans in the New England community and was actually a very important member of several railroad groups, including the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society. So as such, we have a lot of his collection, including his color slides, which are remarkable snapshots of some of the Boston and Maine's railroad history and the history of many other railroads in New England as well. So today we're going to be doing diesels with Dana. We're going to be taking a look at some diesel power that Dana Goodwin shot in color, starting in the 1950s and running up until his death in 1982. So we have quite a range of subjects here for you to view today. So the first image we're going to start out with here is a shot taken in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, and this is June 6, 1954. So this is a railroad enthusiast's fan trip which ran up the Hillsborough branch to the end of the line, which at that point was Hillsborough, New Hampshire. The power for that trip were two Boston and Maine Alco S3s, which were diesel switchers. Numbers were 1180 and 1182, two sister units at the end of the branch here in Hillsborough. Now actually a sister to those engines, number 1186, still exists today up at the Hobo Railroad in Lincoln, New Hampshire, and is used from time to time. So you can definitely go visit that if you're interested in seeing a surviving example of this classic Boston and Maine switcher series. But the two engines are connected up here in Hillsborough. They had just been turned on the Armstrong turntable one at a time, so they're positioned to head back down the branch to Nashua. But it looks like the engine crew is taking a break here. Maybe they're going over to the Hillsborough diner for a bite to eat. And some of the fans are checking out the equipment before the train heads back. And a lot of the train was made up of American Flyer coaches, which were pretty famous Boston and Maine coaches that they used in passenger service. You can just see the steps at the left for the Hillsborough Freight House. The station was gone at this point in time, but the Freight House was and actually is still there. Although the rails here were abandoned in 1979, they hadn't been used since very early 1973, and the rails are gone now today. The Hillsborough branch today ends at Bennington, New Hampshire, right near the Monadnock Paper Company mill. Here we are in East Fitchburg, right in Dana Goodwin's backyard. That's where he was from. He was from Fitchburg. And we have an EMD-SC. Now the EMD-SCs were a very early series of diesel switchers. They were actually first manufactured in 1938. So we have 1106 here in East Fitchburg, which would have been retired in 1957. So didn't last super long for a diesel, as newer engines were built and manufactured and outmoded these earlier diesel switchers. So pretty uncommon to see color photographs of these diesels, as they didn't last too long, and people weren't really shooting color film too often back during that time period. It was more expensive, harder to get, but Dana almost shot exclusively in color, much to our enjoyment today. Another classic B&M diesel, this is an EMD F2A, number 4253, which is in East Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and there's a banner stretched over the front which says Boston and Maine Railroad Employee Family Outing. So this was obviously a special trip using this classic EMD F unit diesel. These were painted in the maroon and gold Minuteman paint scheme, which is classic. Today we enjoy almost more than any other railroad, especially seeing that paint scheme still existing in examples in museums and that sort of thing. So classic look for the Boston and Maine, and here we have one of their most classic types of diesel locomotives. We're going to continue and move the clock ahead a little bit. We're here at Wachusett, Massachusetts, just west of Fitchburg. January 1971, we have two EMD locomotives on the lead of a freight, number 1556, which is a 1950 Boston and Maine GP7. So the EMD GP7s were one of the earliest really successful types of diesel locomotives, and many of them are actually still in service today with short line railroads and regional railroads. So the GP7 was a success story, and 1556 was one of the Boston and Maine's purchases of those GP7s. Behind it we can see GP9, EMD GP9 from 1957, number 1711. Here, still in its delivery paint scheme in 1971, that classic Bluebird paint scheme, which was a trademark of the McGuinness administration on the Boston and Maine. Controversial for sure, but a very popular paint scheme. These two engines are westbound on the Fitchburg division, going up the hill there, so they're working pretty hard. And the faded paint on 1556 may look dingy, but it actually trademarks that engine as a good runner. Many of the engines that didn't receive paint schemes didn't need to go to the repair shop, and the repair shop is where paint was usually applied to locomotives. So engines that lasted longer in their original paint schemes usually ran better. So 1556 is an example of that here. Now we move to Pepperell, Massachusetts on the Hollis branch of the Boston and Maine, which originally was the Worcester, Nashua, and Portland Division main line, a very important main line connecting Worcester, Massachusetts with Portland by way of Nashua, New Hampshire, and Rochester, New Hampshire. At this point in time, most of that line had been abandoned in the 1930s and early 1940s. So the Hollis branch was a dead-end branch which started in Ayer, Massachusetts, and ran up through Hollis, through Pepperell rather, and terminated in Hollis. But the big customer was the paper mill in Pepperell. So here we have the freight arriving in August. Actually, this is August 20th, 1975, behind EMD GP7 number 1564. And you can notice from the front of the locomotive that it's received some striping to celebrate the Bicentennial, which was going to come next year. So here we have the Hollis branch freight coming into Pepperell. Now Ayer, Massachusetts, which is where the Hollis branch started, was an important junction of the Boston and Maine. It's where the Worcester, Nashua, and Portland division crossed over originally the Fitchburg, Maine. So at this point in time, the line to Worcester and the line to Hollis were still intact, and of course the main line was still intact as well. So here we are. In April 1972, we have an eastbound road freight with GP9 number 1746 in that classic bluebird paint scheme on the front. A little dirty, but looking pretty good. And behind it we have 4265B, F7B unit. Behind that, 4268B, another B unit. And coming up on the rear, 4268A, which is an F7A cab unit, which is actually still existing. It's up at Conway Scenic, and they are restoring it to operation. But here we have that Boston and Maine heading eastbound on the Fitchburg division by Ayer Tower. And here at Ayer as well, we're looking eastward. We have GP9 number 1731 and a caboose, probably local power. On the main line, looks like they're heading west, probably going to head back into Ayer Yard, and there's a signal there displaying approach medium heading eastbound as well. Little maintenance shack there at the right with the blue door. Was there for quite a while in Ayer, Massachusetts. So really nice shot, period shot of Ayer. And this was specifically taken August 3rd, 1978. Now here we are at Ashburnham, Massachusetts, South Ashburnham, at Ashburnham Curve. We have an eastbound road freight with 1750 in the lead. 1750 is a GP18, which the B&M acquired in 1961. That was the first and last new power they would receive until the GP38s arrived in 1973. That was the first order they had received since the GP9s in 1957. Following the GP18, we've got two GP9s and then a few more, but the ones that we can identify by number are 1731 and 1732. So all the engines here are still in the classic bluebird paint scheme, heading eastbound on the Fitchburg division. Now we're going to wind the clock back a little bit to Fitchburg in 1949, so a little bit earlier. And we've got Boston, Maine RS2 number 1500 providing pusher service to a westbound road freight. You can see an N5 class caboose C15, which were steel cabooses the Boston and Maine built based off of a Pennsylvania Railroad design, which were designed to withstand a pusher locomotive on the rear. Wooden cabooses didn't hold up as well. So here we have 1500 diesel pusher. Of course, steam engines did provide pusher service as well. But 1500 was an Alco RS2, and many of the Boston and Maine's RS2s were gone by the mid-1960s. However, 1500 survived until 1975. It was the last one that the Boston and Maine had, and it was known as the Queen of East Fitchburg. It was a very famous locomotive. It was used on branch lines out of Fitchburg, so it would have run up the Cheshire branch to Bellows Falls, would have run up the Peterborough branch to Peterborough. Beloved engine, and unfortunately it derailed in 1975 and then ended its career. Another shot of 1500 in Fitchburg with some freight. Really nice, faded a little bit, but another really nice color slide of the 1500 in that classic black and red paint scheme that the Boston and Maine had a lot of their switcher and early road switcher engines delivered in. This was actually the only RS2, I believe, that had this paint scheme. The other ones were delivered in maroon and gold. Now we're going to go up the Peterborough branch in what was originally Mogul country, but at this point in time obviously dieselized. We're here in Peterborough, New Hampshire, March 7th, 1953. The occasion is the last passenger train on the Peterborough branch. They had come up from Worcester, and they're getting ready to head back to Worcester here. Some individuals are posing on the front of the engine to mark the occasion. This was a brand new locomotive at this point in time, this Alco RS3, number 1543, and the B&M used it for that last passenger train in and out of Peterborough. Another shot of the crowd coming to see the engine. This is when it arrived in Peterborough near the end of track. And some shots here of the crowd checking out the train. And there's 1543 getting ready to head back to Worcester. So just a really classic shot of a maroon and gold RS3, brand new RS3 in Peterborough, New Hampshire on the last passenger train. That was March 7th, 1953. We're going to fast forward again, and we're here in August 20th, 1975. This is the same day as that earlier shot that we saw the GP7 pulling the freight into Pepperell, Massachusetts. We're here in Pepperell, and this is the Boston and Maine's Bicentennial exhibit train arriving in Pepperell with GP38-2, number 200, which was actually delivered to the Boston and Maine as number 212. And when the Bicentennial came around, they renumbered it to 200 and repainted it in this patriotic paint scheme. They also had a boxcar with some exhibits on it and a wooden caboose that was borrowed from the Vermont Railway because the Boston and Maine couldn't spare any steel cabooses to use for the exhibit train. So they borrowed a privately owned caboose and just slapped a B&M logo on the side of it. Another shot of the exhibit train there in downtown Pepperell. The Hollis branch was last used in 1981 and was abandoned in 1982. So this is about 7 years before it was abandoned. A nice broadside shot of 200 there in downtown Pepperell. And we're going to switch gears and head up to Canadian Pacific territory. We're in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. St. Johnsbury was a railroad town. It actually was shared by a number of different railroads. The Boston and Maine came up through on the Passumpsic River Railroad. You had the Maine Central come in from their famous Mountain Division. You also had the Canadian Pacific come down from Newport, Vermont, and then you had the St. Johnsbury and Lamoille County, which arrived in St. J from the mid and western part of Vermont over their railroad. So for a railroad town, it was very busy. But here we have Canadian Pacific Alco S2, number 7096, which is drilling cars in the yard on July 20th, 1971. Beautiful color shot by Dana Goodwin. And Dana really loved the Canadian Pacific. He really loved the Canadian National as well. So he spent a lot of time shooting those railroads in addition to the B&M. We're going to go over to another part of Vermont. We're here in Rutland, Vermont, right in the center of the state. The Delaware and Hudson came into Rutland from Whitehall, New York. So here we are in Rutland in 1964. We have two Alco RS2s, number 4021 and 4022. They're leading an RRE excursion into Rutland over the D&H. Another shot of the two classic RS2s there in downtown Rutland. Of course, Rutland was also originally famous as the home site for the Rutland Railroad and later the Green Mountain Railroad as well. Today it's part of the Vermont rail system. And we're going to go over to another New England railroad. We're here on the Grand Trunk, and specifically we're here in Gorham, New Hampshire. This is October 1974. It's a 470 Club excursion. Now the 470 Club was another railroad enthusiasts group which was operated out of Portland, Maine. And this was a train that ran over the Grand Trunk, their line from Portland, Maine to Island Pond, Vermont. And this is a classic shot here of these two Grand Trunk engines which had led the excursion. The Grand Trunk was a subsidiary of Canadian National, as was the Central Vermont, so those were two railroads that were owned by Canadian National as American subsidiaries. Another shot of the train doing a photo run by pretty close to Gorham, New Hampshire on that Grand Trunk main line. Flying white flags, of course, for an extra. And a shot of the Gorham, New Hampshire depot. This is a railroad museum today. Don Provencher was a very well-known railroad enthusiast, and that was his territory up there. He had a lot to do with that becoming a railroad museum. Now we're going to move back in time a little bit. We're here in September 1969, September 12th, 1969 to be exact. This was a special trip which was operated on the Grand Trunk Railroad by the Cora Temple Shrine of Lewiston, Maine, some Shriners, and they chartered a special trip to Montreal over the Grand Trunk Railroad. So we have the train here at Island Pond, which was a famous yard on the Grand Trunk there, Island Pond, Vermont. We have Grand Trunk 4906, a GP9, which is leading the train into Island Pond. Nice shot there of the Island Pond station and the pedestrian walkway which ran across the yard there. Of course, it's hard to hide the Canadian heritage with the Canadian national style paint schemes lettered for the Grand Trunk. We have number 4558 here with 4906, and behind it a Central Vermont GP9, which was another, as we said, subsidiary of Canadian National. We have the steam generator car there providing services to the passenger train. And then as the train heads out, we can see some Canadian National coaches there in the Grand Trunk excursion. Once again, this was a Shriners excursion operated from Lewiston to Montreal. Coming to the end of the presentation, we have a few more shots to show you here before we come to the end. But kind of fitting here, we've got a Canadian National train heading around the bend at Island Pond into the distance. And then we'll move to our final series of shots, which are going to be set on the Maine Central. Motor car there on the left, section crew there as the train pulled into Island Pond. Now we'll head back over to St. Johnsbury, Vermont, which, as we said, was the end point for the Maine Central's Mountain Division out of Portland, Maine. We've got E7 number 711 here with a train getting ready to head back to Portland. And then on November 13th, 1958, we have the very last passenger train to run over the Maine Central's Mountain Division with E7 number 708 getting ready to depart here at St. Johnsbury. Second from left is Arnold Wilder, and on the far right is Dana Goodwin. Not sure who the two other individuals are, but some of you might, so if you do, please leave a comment below. We would love to identify them. But they're standing here on the platform getting ready to ride the last Maine Central train through Crawford Notch back to Portland, Maine. Of course, after that, the branch was still used for freight service up until about 1983 or so, and a few other extra moves into 1984 and 5. Today, some of it is still used by the Conway Scenic, so you can go ride the Mountain Division. And there's the train preparing to depart the platform at St. J. To the left, you can see a 70-tonner, which was owned by the St. Johnsbury and Lamoille County. They had the contract to switch St. Johnsbury, so they're doing some freight work there at the same time. Now, as we said, the 470 Club was a popular railroad group out of Portland, and they operated what they called the Round the Mountains excursions. These were passenger excursions which ran through the White Mountains on various railroad lines. So here they are in Groveton, New Hampshire, number 573 and 574, two EMD GP7s, Maine Central diesels. 573 was probably the most famous Maine Central diesel. It was known as Mr. Miller's engine because the president of the Maine Central, Stephen Miller, really loved, or I'm not sorry, Spencer Miller, E. Spencer Miller, really loved the engine, and he would use it on all his passenger trains. And the engine does still survive today at Conway Scenic, so that was Spencer Miller's favorite diesel. You can see two examples of the green paint schemes here that the Maine Central used on their diesels. And we'll close that out here with a shot of the train heading back to Portland in Crawfords with that classic Maine Central harvest green and gold paint scheme. And we got one more shot here. That train right there getting ready to head back through Crawford Notch. Wouldn't it be nice to see a train and an engine in that paint scheme run through Crawford Notch again? So that'll close out our Maine Central shots here, ending up with diesels with Dana. We hope you enjoyed this presentation here, looking at some of Dana's famous color shots taken on some various New England railroads. As always, we'd love your support. If you'd love to join or donate to the Society, you can do so on our website. And as so, you can join as a volunteer, and you can help us preserve some of these collections and present them to people for future viewings. We're going to be continuing our digital presentations, so we hope you'll join us next time for more New England railroad history. In the meantime, stay safe and have a great day.